Welcome to the Find the Way podcast. In this show, we will try to explore what is happening in emerging markets and how entrepreneurs, investors, and communities are simply finding the way to make phenomenal things happen, regardless how volatile the environment may sometimes seem. I'm super excited to present to you today to Carmen de la Cerda. Carmen is the managing partner at BuenTrip Ventures, a firm that seeks to identify, mentor, and invest in the best early-stage startup founders in Latin America. Recently, BuenTrip Ventures announced it is launching its second fund, making it the first institutional venture capital fund operating out of Ecuador and investing throughout Latin America. Carmen's mission is to transform at a fundamental level the region and throughout technology. She works with founders, mentors, and investors in Ecuador and abroad in order to provide access to knowledge, networks, and capital to companies with high growth potential. How's it going over there in Quito?
Quito today is very sunny, as you can see in the background. It's a very nice way to start the year, and it's crazy. It's January is almost done by now, so.
And what is the holiday season in Ecuador? Is it like in Argentina that the holiday season starts basically after Christmas?
The holiday season?
So summer holiday season. Let's say compared to Europe, we had the main holiday season is July, August.
No, schools go out in summer. That's from July to August. So now holidays is just Christmas, New Year's, and then everybody starts working again and children go to school again. So.
Okay. So you say the way that I'm used to saying summer, but over here now being in Buenos Aires, it takes a little while to get used to saying summer is now in middle of January, and typically I'm used to be freezing in negative 20 degrees back in Finland.
Yeah. Us being in the equator, it's actually two seasons, the rainier one and the drier one. But you can have rain and it can be sunny within 2 hours. And really, there's not much change throughout the years. It's just holidays happen with the northern hemisphere schedule.
Nice. I prefer that. Maybe I got traumatized back in the darkness and coldness of Finland as growing up. But cool. I'm super excited to have this chat today with you, Carmen. You've been playing the game from Ecuador. You've been developing the ecosystem for a while now over there. So I'm super excited to have you here today. Thanks for joining, Carmen.
Thank you, Eric, for having me. And I'm very excited to share what we've been up to, what I've been up to for the past couple of years, building the ecosystem down here in Ecuador.
Nice. Would you be able to give a little intro on your own words to the audience? Who's Carmen and what are you currently doing at BuenTrip Ventures?
In a nutshell, I would say I'm a designer turned PC. So in my past life, I used to be a graphic designer, a communications designer. That's what I studied in undergrad. That's what I worked on for a couple of years after I graduated. But always wanting to get my hands dirty into strategy and why things are done the way they are in companies and in startups. So I pivoted my career towards entrepreneurship a couple of years back. And that led me to do a master's degree in a business school and then start a very, very brief journey as a founder, a fintech founder. And now I can see how that was doomed to fail, but that opened up the door to work at BuenTrip in the earlier years of what BuenTrip was doing. And now I'm a managing partner at BuenTrip Ventures, where we're actively investing in software companies in Latin America.
Nice. Would you be able to give a couple examples and reasons why was it doomed to fail, the first venture you basically embarked upon?
We were 5 founders, none of them tech founders, no developer, no non-technical founders, 5 very diverse in terms of geography, where we came from, backgrounds, but as I say, non-tech, building a tech company, and with different timing in terms of our personal lives and priorities. So 5's a bunch when you get
it's
to
a lot.
Analyze a team, and non-technical. Basically, that would sum up what I see was wrong.
And now, if you would be able to do it all over again, what would be the dream amount of co-founders?
I would say 2 is a good number. 3 is good also. But definitely to have a tech founder and a business or someone who knows the industry you're embarking on, that mix is ideal. And we had none of those, we had none of those. It was just a good idea and a bunch of master degree students starting something.
Cool. I bet it was a great learning experience. And here you are now at BuenTrip Ventures. You have been one of the first seed VCs from Ecuador, am I right? And would you be able to share a little bit about your story? When we were having our intro call, you were mentioning that you went all the way from co-working space, that little by little you started going towards an accelerator, and from there you ended up being a fund. So could you share a little bit more about that journey?
Of course, as a firm, BuenTrip didn't start looking to raise a fund and to invest out of a fund or become professional investors. BuenTrip started out wanting to give back, wanting to build an ecosystem where there wasn't really founders providing knowledge, founders providing access to networks. There was a bunch of founders, but no, not really a cohesive ecosystem where they could land and grow. So BuenTrip started sharing 3 things. We call it in Spanish las 3 Cs del emprendimiento, which is contactos, conocimiento y capital. In English, contacts, networks, and capital. And when we started, we really didn't. The capital part was access to capital. And we started actually as a physical space, a co-working space where we aimed to attract founders, their startups, ideas, and give out workshops and 3-day startups, events. And so we started giving out mentorships at night when the founders had time, and mentors of our network so ended up their day jobs and headed down to BuenTrip to give out mentorship to startups that were starting their companies. So there was the BuenTrip a day, which was a co-working space that ended up attracting designers and freelancers, digital nomads, but not really many startup founding teams. And at night, we got to see the real work being done, right? So we gave out mentorship to more than 70 or 80 startups throughout a couple of years. And then we realized that we were doing day in, day out, giving out sort of the same mentorships, giving out the same knowledge, reaching out to the same mentors to give it out for startup 1, 2, 3, 4. So we were eroding our mentor base and decided to standardize that mentorship program into an acceleration program. That's how we launched the first cohort-based acceleration program at BuenTrip. It's called El Programa.
And in what years were those? When was the first part initiated, and when did this accelerator start happening?
The acceleration, we launched it in 2021. This year is going to be our 3rd cohort. We're starting in March. And the mentorship program ran 4 years before that. And so we did a bunch of in-person tailor-made programs for 70 startups before our acceleration program. So 2021, we took that big step, and that was the same year that we decided to launch a BuenTrip Ventures Fund 1. Because as we went through the mentorship program, the BuenTrip founders, my partners, Felipe Cheriak and Fernando Rivera, started writing angel checks. Of course, we saw diamonds in the rough as we mentored them, and we were the first one in as angels. But that, of course, has its limits. Angel pockets aren't as deep as a fund. And so we decided, as we built the accelerator, to contribute part of that portfolio into the fund and then raise additional capital to continue to support not only the startups that we were already invested in, but to invest in new ones. So that's how Fund 1 was born. It's a prototype fund where we have 23 companies. We're fully deployed, and it's mostly Ecuadorian founders. We wanted to prove the thesis that we could identify, mentor, and invest in Ecuadorian founders, Ecuadorian startups. And I think we proved that to ourselves, and also we wanted to prove that we could, as a team, identify and invest in the best startups out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then, if you would be able to elaborate, how big is the game of technology in Ecuador? How much venture funding is being deployed on an annual basis? Would you be able to give some numbers? And how many companies are, let's say, considered as startups in the region?
Okay, so in terms of numbers, I wouldn't have them right now. We're actually building the first report with EcuaCap that was born last year. EcuaCap is the Ecuadorian Venture Capital Association, private capital association, and we're starting to gather the data together with them to have those numbers, because everything that has been going on has been as angels, or it's a very early on in terms of numbers in the venture ecosystem down here. So, and also another problem that we're having, and it's not only in Ecuador, but I bet everyone's having it, it's the geography and the nationality of companies. That those lines are getting blurred more and more. And we as Ecuador can claim in some of the startups, but other countries are going to map them also. The geography and the nationality of the startup is really an issue.
Because so as you said, the boundaries are going to be blurred, and everybody's going to claim that as their own. Everybody wants, when you pick up a winner, everybody wants to say, hey, they're from here.
Yeah, of course. So there's going to be a double count.
Inevitably so. But then if we focus on your fund, how much, now you mentioned that you have 23 firms in your portfolio, how much capital that means? How much capital has been deployed by your fund?
Deployed, I would say close to 3 million into those 23 companies. And 80% of that is in Ecuadorian founders. We've also made investments in Peru, Bolivia, Mexico, and Colombia founders starting their company in Miami. So that's a little bit about how we started to test the waters of looking into other geographies to invest in. And that's going to be our focus in Fund 2. And also, I would double click that in terms of Ecuadorian founders, because we've made investments into companies that have started with Ecuadorian founders, but in Brooklyn, in Canada, in Brazil.
It's just scattered everywhere.
It's scattered, but most of them are building their tech teams in Ecuador. And that's also something that we see as a positive impact down here.
Absolutely. And when I was looking at some of the stats that I was able to find about Ecuadorian venture game, so to speak, there were roughly 315 plus 300 startups that are categorized as startups. Is that correct?
Probably you found that in our tech startup radar that we publish quarterly. We do that very, very, I would say, like, heads down job as a service to the ecosystem from a couple of years back. And those around 300 startups, I wouldn't say they're venture backed. It's just evidence that they exist, not that they have been fundraising or that they have raised capital successfully, or even that they're gaining traction quarter after quarter. It's more than what's out there, who's starting what in what segments. So I wouldn't use that as a number of venture-backed companies.
But overall firms that
a subset of those have, And that's something that we do look into, but not all of those share those details with us.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just a question overall regarding Ecuador and those 300 companies that are listed there by you overall that are operating in that environment. Is it that the lack of access to capital is basically a huge obstacle for those, and do they even know what is venture capital? Because a lot of the entrepreneurs and firms that I have met within Latin America is that they simply say with extreme frustration that, they're profitable, they've been growing month over month, year over year, but they still don't get access to capital in terms of equity or even in terms of loans, because there is a lot of uncertainty and extra risks associated with investing in companies in this region. Is that the similar problem in Ecuador?
Yeah, definitely a lack of access to capital, a lack of proper supply chain in capital with early stage funds or angels, and then going up the ladder in later stage funds. It would be the dream to have,
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't blame it all in terms of to that. I think the startups that have learned to play the game and learned to network regionally do get to tap into those pockets regionally across the Americas. So it would be ideal to have more angels, be those very early checks in order for startups to validate and then play the game of raising follow-on rounds and to hit the marks. But I think that there are success stories. To have more and more of those role models that teach this game to the new generations of founders is key, because there are paths that they can go through acceleration programs throughout the region, build a proper network of, if there aren't enough angels in your country of origin, that's the reality here in Ecuador, and to tap into other networks, and to also know how to not damage your cap table very early on, because that's going to turn you into an unfundable company. So there are a bunch of subtleties that can worsen the path for early stage founders.
Would you be able to give an example of damaging your cap table early on, just to trying to understand, is it similar to what we are facing in Europe or in the US, or what do you typically see when a startup comes into you and is pitching and you go for further with your screening process? How does it typically look like?
Ideally, we would like to see a company where founders have most of the ownership of the company when we're analyzing it. But in an ecosystem where angels aren't as sophisticated as we would like them to be, founders get to, in those very early stages, out of desperation probably, or lack of knowledge of how to play this game, they accept investment in less than ideal conditions, giving out too much ownership very early on. We see cases of giving out 51% to an angel, for instance, or to a corporate, and then who's gonna come in? What VC is gonna come in to a damaged cap table such as that, right? So things like that are definitely red flags and deal breakers. So a founder has to learn the ropes even before they accept their first check, in order to make sure that they're not going to become unfundable down the road and not act out of necessity for those initial 100K, 200K.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very interesting. And from there, basically, a question regarding the entity structure in terms of Ecuadorian companies. Is it like in many parts of South America, is it a similar structure that most of the companies that are raising money are creating an entity in Delaware or the Caymans, or is that the norm by now?
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's the norm, and it's part of the game I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. We as BuenTrip, we wouldn't invest if it weren't in those VC-friendly jurisdictions, right? So
Yeah.
some of them haven't built that structure. When we come in and we help them out, point them in the right direction, that's not a problem. But it's the industry standard throughout the region. So it has nothing to do with Ecuador. It's just how it's supposed to be done. Yeah.
And then just for the European audience, mainly, it would be great to get a better glimpse at what are typically the valuation caps that are present in the rounds that you're involved. You're investing through safes at pre-seed and seed stage, right? Then what type of valuation caps are you encountering?
Okay, so we invest in two different ways through two different avenues. One is in programa that I mentioned. So that's a standard deal that values companies in 1.2 cap. That's our pre-seed investment, and it's the earliest we come in. And then we do analyze deals that come outside el programa. We call it our community-led deal flow. When we get warm intros from other VC firms or our portfolio companies point us in the direction of their peers. And we see companies in seed stage anywhere from 3 to, 12 cap. But there's always a couple that go beyond that. And it all depends on the eliteness of the founder, also their track record, their traction with this company.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what are the current major trends in terms of industries that where companies are being founded now in Ecuador? Would you be able to give a glimpse to that? What are you seeing?
What are we seeing? I would like to answer that in two ways, because one is what we want to see more of, and two is what we're seeing.
Sounds good.
Our investment thesis is focused on investing in B2B software companies that are building the infrastructure layer that would lead to digital transformation in the region. So that's what we like to see more. Just like there's infrastructure lacking in the real world in terms of roads, connectivity, water, you name it. There's an infrastructure layer in terms of software that's we're looking to build with the companies that we're going to fund. In terms of what we're seeing, it's funny because we see startups come in waves. Every year there's a trend. Last year we analyzed a couple of payroll companies. The year before that we analyzed a bunch of logistics last mile companies. So it's like they come in waves. We get to see that through our radar that we publish. And also we get to see that in programa call out for applications. But more and more, we're seeing more of what we like. And it's companies that get to build this infrastructure and get to be integrated among them to provide a better service to e-commerce. So there's the logistic arm, there's the communications part, there's the fintech side of things. So, and within the portfolio, we're seeing companies not only collaborate as founders and help each other out when they're having difficulties, but also integration between their products to have a more robust value prop, and they can pursue bigger clients together. They can integrate transversally and have better outcome when dealing with corporates and their clients when it's B2B, right?
Absolutely. And from there, you mentioned that B2B players that are accelerating the digital transformation of Ecuador and the region. What does a digital transformation mean in Ecuador, or from your lenses? Because countries have very different stages of development. And in these regards, what these type of digital transformation opportunities also exist in Ecuador?
In Ecuador, Ecuador is a very good testing ground for startups, and not only startups, but actually corporates that want to test out new products or test out new marketing strategies. And that's because Ecuador has a great diversity in a very small country with a small population. City behaves very differently, and each culture within a city is very, very differently. So very much like Bogota, and Guayaquil is very similar to Lima. There are things in between in Cuenca. So if something works out in Ecuador, it will very likely work out throughout the region. And founders get to test out the waters in a very forgiving ecosystem. We still fly below the radar in Ecuador. So if something really doesn't work out, then you just pivot and you're not shattered and your reputation is still intact. So, I would say that Ecuador is not very different from the rest of the region, but has all of these particular characteristics that make it very, very good testing ground. Even, I don't know, Uber tests out new features of their product in Ecuador to see whether they deploy it throughout the region. Waves years back launched in Ecuador and then scaled it throughout the region.
Yeah, absolutely. Just out of curiosity, some of the stats from Ecuador as a country. You mentioned you have a small population. This is roughly a little bit over 18 million, 18.2 million, roughly the population. Your GDP per capita, 21 that I was able to find, was a little bit less than $6,000 US. Are you seeing in country level growth, social upward mobility in terms of social classes that will create tremendous demand for certain sectors, certain products and services that come out of this new group, new population that has new needs? How's that trajectory looking for Ecuador as a whole from the economical point of view?
Well, I'm not an economics pro, but I look at the landscape with hope and what you mentioned, social mobility, and actually the makeup of the country in terms of how it's split. Of those roughly 18 million, both Quito and Guayaquil have the same population. It's 1 year we come out in Quito on top, and the next year Guayaquil. So it's very homogeneous. I would say it's not so centralized like other countries, where if you're not in the capital, then you're doing nothing in terms of the quality of jobs and what you get access to. So it's, despite all the political hiccups we've had throughout the years, Ecuador continues to be, I don't know, heads down, working. It's a very, as I mentioned earlier, like a very forgiving, for the good and the bad. We have short-term memory problems because we keep stepping into the same hole. But it's a forgiving way of living, I would say. And that I went in the other direction of your question, but I look at the future, hopeful of this country providing better jobs, more and better jobs, and technology plays a huge part in that. We don't want to continue to be known for export of petroleum, bananas, and shrimp. We want to at least digitalize those industries and be known for exporting brains and software. And I bet that's the dream of most of our countries in South America.
Yes, and from there we can jump on into a cultural aspect of technology. Of course, we have very different stages of technology adoption within countries in South America. Number one question would be that what is that status currently in Ecuador in terms of that population? How well technology has been adopted? And number two would be that, is it socially acceptable? Is it socially cool to go to work for startups, for technology companies? Or is it still like a lot of people in Brazil are still educating their kids and wanting to push their kids to be lawyers and bankers and very traditional, roles. How is tech
Mhm.
perceived in Ecuador?
I think it's starting to change, but it's as you described. Universities are graduating a bunch of lawyers, a bunch of doctors, marketeers, and really computer science. I don't know where it hits the rankings in terms of graduates, and it's also different of what university you see, right? But usually the careers come from not the high classes or the more established families, let's say. It's more of an aspirational career, and that is still, I think, a problem because the tech guy in a company is not invited to the board meeting, right? Because it's a closed circle. The board meetings are made up of finance guys, lawyers, marketeers. And if that happens in big corporates or in big SMEs, children of those people are not going to study technology. So it's something that I think has to change. And the more throughout the past 6 years that I've been around in this world, I think it's starting to change. And working at a startup is something that's cool. I see a bunch of people that are shifting careers that have worked in the corporate world for years, and then say, well, I'm going to sacrifice my monthly income, but I want to join a startup. And that's something that really didn't happen 6 years ago. So I'm very, very hopeful that that mobility is going to happen more and more, and that more of the high school graduates are going to choose computer science and tech careers down the road. And that has to happen from middle class upward in order for founders to be well perceived, and also for the tech guys and girls within larger companies to be more valued, and for the craft to be more valued, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. We're still going back into the level of tech adoption within Ecuador. Are people by now, would you say, extremely digitally native, or is internet connection easily available throughout the country? Just basic things that how is the level to understand tech? Have they been using? Have they been educating themselves? What's going on there?
It's a mobile first landscape. So tech gets consumed through mobile. Almost everyone has a smartphone. Almost everyone has connectivity of some sort. Phones are getting better and have more capacity. So at the beginning of my life in this world, I would make the metaphor that if you're building an app for the lower income segment, yes, of course, everyone has a phone, but they have a phone where you're competing. It's like real estate, right? So your app is competing with the picture of the grandson in terms of capacity of that phone, or it's competing with Facebook. So it's real estate in that screen, but now more and more. I don't know if I explain myself correctly in terms of if you see the icons in a smartphone, if you have a lower tier smartphone, it's not going to be able to hold up more than Facebook and pictures and maybe another app that's the bank. But you're not going to build an app for a vitamin startup that's not really a painkiller and have proper adoption because of connectivity, and not only connectivity, but actually the capacity of those phones. But now phones are becoming more and more robust in terms of capacity, and connectivity is becoming better. So I think that's an evolution that's happening, but it's a mobile first landscape economy. So that's how things should start. And because everyone has a phone, but almost no one has more than that device. But that's more into B2C, right? But everything trickles down to B2C.
Thanks for sharing, Carmen. I think that's super fascinating to hear. And it's a lot of the times we forget those differences. We're so accustomed to live in our own mental bubbles, and we think that everybody lives the same way that we live our lives, even though we know that that's not the reality. But it's still, we tend to forget that you might not even have the same capacity, even though you have the same device as smartphone. That was super fascinating to hear. And as a last final note, would you be able to give a little prediction of Ecuadorian tech, where it will be in 2030s? It's a very open, broad question, but what are you seeing and thinking?
So I would say that Ecuador for now has been the region's best well-kept secret, and it's not going to be that in the next couple of years. And by the next 10 years, I would say that we're going to have a next unicorn. We already have Kushki as the one that opened that door for a bunch of others to come. And we're going to have a couple of massively valuable companies coming from Ecuador. We're seeing great things from our portfolio companies. Just to mention a few: Outscore, AirPods, Authority, in terms of Ecuadorian founders doing great things. Also giving back to the ecosystem, because I think it's key for those role models that are going to become the next, maybe not unicorns, but massively valuable companies, to give back in, as I started, contactos, conocimiento y capital, for them to become the next angel investors, for them to
be a beacon of hope for everybody else to start venturing.
Yeah, totally. And for them to open up their contacts, pave the way for the next generation of founders. So these startups that are growing today are going to be the academies for the next founders, the mentors for the next companies. And I see that we're going to have more than a couple of those role models that help us at BuenTrip do the heavy lifting.
Absolutely. So it's like the hidden gem has been found, the diamond has been found, and now the polishing work starts. And then there you go.
Yep.
Well, thanks a lot, Carmen, for sharing your story and your perspectives on what's happening in the tech ecosystem from Ecuadorian lenses, so to speak. Thanks a lot for sharing these. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for having me.